He was handsome. He was intelligent. He was polite, educated, and charming, and he was one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. This is the true story of Ted Bundy, a man who murdered young women across multiple U.S. states, escaped from prison twice, and fooled nearly everyone who met him. This is not just a crime story. This is a story about deception, psychology, and how evil can hide behind a smile. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But from the very beginning, his life was built on a lie. Ted was raised believing that his mother was his sister, and that his grandparents were his parents. His biological father was never officially identified. This confusion about identity would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside the home, things were not normal. Ted's grandfather was reportedly violent and abusive. He hated people of different races, abused animals, and ruled the household with fear. Ted grew up surrounded by anger, silence, and secrets, even as a child. There were signs something was wrong. Family members later reported that young Ted liked watching violent scenes, had disturbing thoughts, was unusually cold emotionally yet outwardly. He appeared normal, quiet, intelligent, and polite. As a teenager, Ted moved to Washington State with his mother in public. He was the perfect young man. College student, volunteer, politically active, well-spoken, but in private. Ted was developing dark fantasies. He became obsessed with violence, control, and sexual domination. These fantasies grew stronger over time, fueled by rejection and humiliation. One relationship deeply affected him, a girlfriend who broke up with him because she felt Ted lacked ambition and stability. This rejection shattered his ego. From that moment on, Ted Bundy developed a deep hatred toward women who reminded him of her. Educated, confident, long-haired brunettes, Ted learned something powerful early in life. People trust confidence. He dressed well. He spoke gently. He smiled warmly. He even volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline, listening to people in pain while secretly planning violence of his own. No one suspected him. This is what made Ted Bundy different. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone you'd help without hesitation. In January 1974, Ted Bundy committed his first confirmed murder. The victim was a young woman named Linda Ann Healy, a university student in Washington. She disappeared from her home after being abducted in the early morning hours. Ted had learned how to hunt. His method was simple and terrifying. Pretend to be injured, ask for help, gain trust, strike once the victim was under his control. He became something else entirely. Police had no leads. Ted Bundy vanished back into society. Touched. Unseen over the next year, women across Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado began disappearing. Witnesses described a man named Ted, wearing a cast, driving a Volkswagen Beetle. Polite and friendly, but even with these clues, police struggled. Why? Because Ted Bundy didn't fit the image of a killer. He was a law student. He volunteered in politics. He smiled at reporters. Meanwhile, bodies were piling up. In 1975, Bundy was finally arrested after a survivor escaped and identified him, yet even in custody, Ted Bundy continued to manipulate. He acted innocent. He defended himself in court. He charmed the media some. People believed him, others couldn't. But what happened next shocked the entire country. While on trial in Colorado, Ted Bundy did the unthinkable. He escaped, not once, but twice. His second escape led him to Florida, where he committed his most brutal crimes. Including the infamous Chi Omega sorority murders, the killer had returned angrier than ever. Ted Bundy was now America's most wanted man, but his story was far from over. In the next part, we will explore his Florida murders, his trial, his confessions, and the terrifying psychology behind his mind. By mid-1974, something terrifying was happening across the Pacific Northwest. Young women were disappearing. College campuses once safe, familiar places were slowly turning into hunting grounds. Posters appeared on trees, streetlights, and notice boards. Smiling faces stared back from paper, asking silently to be found, but they never were. Police departments across Washington and Oregon were overwhelmed. These were not random crimes. There was a pattern, but no face. No clear suspect, and behind it all was a man who blended in perfectly. Ted Bundy was no longer experimenting. He was refining his craft. Ted Bundy's method was calculated, patient, and horrifyingly effective. He learned that violence alone doesn't lure victims. Trust does. He would wear a fake cast or sling, pretend to be injured, ask for help loading books or equipment, introduce himself as Ted. Women helped him because he seemed harmless, educated, polite, respectful. Once they were close enough, the illusion shattered. Bundy would strike off in using a blunt object, rendering his victims unconscious. He would then restrain them and transport them to a secondary location. What happened next was unspeakable. This was not impulsive murder. This was planned domination. One detail appeared again and again, witnesses reported. Tan Volkswagen Beetle. Inside the car, Bundy had removed the passenger seat, making it easier to force victims inside unnoticed. To most people, it was just another small car. To investigators, it slowly became a moving crime scene. But still, Ted Bundy walked free. Why? Because his appearance didn't match society's idea of a monster. Not everyone Bundy targeted died. Some women escaped him. Their stories are among the most chilling. Parts of this case, one survivor recalled how Bundy suddenly changed. The moment we were alone, his eyes went cold, like someone else had taken over. Another woman managed to jump from his moving car. These survivors provided critical details: his name, his voice, his car. But even with this information, police still struggled. Ted Bundy was hiding in plain sight as disappearances increased. Bundy tried to maintain his normal life. He attended law school, dated women, appeared on television, spoke confidently about justice, but cracks were forming. People close to him noticed changes, mood swings, increasing arrogance. A need for control. Bundy believed he was smarter than everyone else. That belief would become his greatest weakness. In August 1975, Ted Bundy was pulled over by police in Utah. Inside his car, officers found handcuffs, rope masks, a crowbar. To Bundy, these were ordinary items. To police, they were alarming. Soon after, a survivor identified him. Ted Bundy was arrested, but this was only the beginning. Ted Bundy treated the courtroom like a stage. He smiled at cameras, represented himself, spoke calmly and confidently. Some spectators believed him. Some reporters admired him. This was exactly what Bundy wanted. He wasn't just fighting for freedom. He was feeding his ego. But the evidence was growing, and Ted Bundy was running out of time. Ted Bundy was now behind bars. But prison walls would not hold him for long, because what happened next would shock America. In Part 3, we will cover Bundy's manipulation of the justice system, his shocking escape, and how a killer walked free again. By late 1976, Ted Bundy was sitting in a Colorado jail cell for the first time in years. He was trapped, but Bundy was not panicking. He was planning prison. To him was not the end of freedom, it was simply another problem to solve. He spent his days studying routines, guards, schedules, and weaknesses in the system. Ted Bundy believed one thing with absolute certainty: no one was smarter than him. And if the system had caught him, it was only because it had gotten lucky. Bundy made a dangerous decision. He chose to represent himself in court at the time. This seemed reckless, but it was calculated. By acting as his own lawyer, Bundy gained access to legal materials, freedom of movement, time outside his cell. More importantly, he gained an audience. Bundy questioned witnesses, argued legal points, and charmed spectators. Some even began to doubt his guilt. He wasn't just fighting a case, he was performing. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was taken to a courthouse library to research his case. No handcuffs, No leg irons. Just guards nearby. It was all he needed. Bundy waited for the perfect moment. Then he ran. He leapt from a second-story window and disappeared into the Colorado wilderness. America was stunned. A man accused of multiple murders had simply vanished. But Bundy's freedom didn't last long. After 6 days, weak and disoriented, he was recaptured. Most people believed this was the end. They were wrong. Back in jail, Bundy adjusted his strategy. He began losing weight intentionally. Over weeks, he shrank his body just enough to fit through a small opening in his cell ceiling. On December 30th, 1977, while guards celebrated the holidays, Bundy climbed into the ceiling and crawled into freedom. This time, didn't just escape, he disappeared completely. Bundy traveled across the country under false names. He stole cars. He avoided attention. He stayed invisible. By January 1978, he arrived in Florida. Here, something changed. Bundy was no longer careful. He was angry, desperate, uncontrolled. The monster he had kept hidden was about to explode. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, Ted Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What followed was one of the most shocking crimes in U.S. history. Bundy attacked multiple women in a matter of minutes. The brutality stunned investigators. For the first time, Bundy had lost control. This was no longer about secrecy. This was rage. Florida was now hunting the most dangerous fugitive in America. Just weeks later, Bundy was arrested again, this time after attacking another woman. There would be no escape now. No charm. No tricks. No sympathy. Ted Bundy was finally facing justice. But the story wasn't over. Because what came next would turn his trial into a national spectacle. Ted Bundy was back in custody. This time, in Florida, and this time, the world was watching in Part 4. We will cover the Florida trial, Bundy's media obsession, his shocking courtroom behavior, and how the jury saw through the mask. By mid-1978, Ted Bundy was sitting in a Florida jail cell, facing charges that carried one inevitable outcome: death. This time, there would be no leniency, no second chances, no benefit of the doubt. Florida prosecutors were determined to make an example of him, but Bundy was equally determined to turn the trial into something else entirely: a spectacle. From the moment the trial was announced, the media descended on Florida. Reporters, cameras, crowds. Ted Bundy became a national obsession. Newspapers called him the All-American Killer, the devil with a smile, the boy next door. Bundy loved it. For a man driven by ego and control, this was the ultimate stage. He smiled for cameras. He waved. He flirted to some watching at home. He still didn't look like a murderer, and that disturbed people more than anything else. Once again, Bundy made a bold move. He chose to represent himself. The courtroom became his theater. He questioned witnesses, argued technicalities, spoke confidently to the jury. At times, it almost worked, but Florida prosecutors were prepared. They presented eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, survivor statements slowly. Methodically, they dismantled Bundy's carefully crafted image. The mask was cracking. Then something strange happened. During the trial, Ted Bundy proposed marriage to a woman who had been visiting him. Under Florida law, a courtroom proposal, if accepted, was legally binding. Bundy knew this. The proposal wasn't about love. It was about control, attention, power, even while facing execution. Bundy wanted to prove he could still manipulate people. The courtroom watched in disbelief. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. It didn't take long. Ted Bundy was found guilty. For the first time, there was no applause, no cheering, only silence. The charming smile faded. The man who once believed he was Untouchable now faced the reality he had avoided his entire life. Judgment. Ted Bundy was sentenced to death. As the sentence was read, Bundy stood still. No emotion, no reaction. Later, he told reporters, "I'm not surprised." But those who saw him closely noticed something different. Fear for the first time. Ted Bundy had lost control. The nation was divided. Some felt relief. Some felt horror. Some couldn't believe it was finally over. Victims' families watched quietly. There was no victory, only closure. But Ted Bundy's story still wasn't finished, because on death row, he would do something unexpected, something calculated, something chilling. Ted Bundy was sentenced to die, but before his execution, he would begin to talk. Confessions, details, secrets. In Part 5, we will explore Bundy on death row, his late confessions, his meetings with investigators, and the terrifying psychology behind his mind. Ted Bundy was transferred to Florida State Prison, where he would spend his final years on death row. The cell was small. The routine was strict. The walls were permanent. For a man who thrived on movement, control, and attention, death row was psychological torture. But Bundy adapted. He read constantly. He exercised. He spoke politely to guards, and most importantly, he began to negotiate. Ted Bundy believed that as long as he had information, he had power. Investigators from across the country wanted answers. How many victims? Where were the bodies? Were there accomplices? Bundy knew the truth, but he gave it slowly, piece by piece, name by name, location by location, not out of guilt, but to delay his execution. Every confession was a bargaining chip. One of the strangest aspects of Bundy's confessions was how he spoke. He often described his crimes in the third person, saying, "The individual becomes addicted to violent fantasies." This wasn't accidental. It allowed him to avoid responsibility, distance himself emotionally, appear analytical rather than remorseful. Bundy presented himself as a case study, not a killer. To him, this was still a performance. During interviews, Bundy claimed that his crimes were influenced by violent media and fantasy. This claim sparked outrage. Experts rejected the idea that external influences created Bundy. Instead, psychologists concluded the fantasies came from within. The violence escalated over time. Control was the central motivation. Bundy didn't kill because he lost control, he killed to gain it. This remains one of the most disturbing unanswered questions. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders. Investigators believe the number could be much higher. Bundy never gave a final, complete list. Some families never received closure, and that may have been intentional. Even at the end, Bundy wanted power over others' pain. As his execution date approached, Bundy became more talkative. He gave interviews. He spoke to psychologists. He asked for attention. He wanted to be remembered as intelligent, complex, misunderstood, but the public had changed. The charm no longer worked. People now saw Ted Bundy for what he truly was in his final days. Something shifted. The confident smile disappeared. His voice changed. His posture collapsed. For the first time, Ted Bundy wasn't in control. He was afraid. The man who caused so much fear now faced it himself. Ted Bundy's execution date was set. There would be no more appeals, no more delays, no more bargaining. In Part 6, we will cover Bundy's final days, his execution, the nation's reaction, what happened after his death. By January 1989, Ted Bundy had reached the end of the road. All appeals were exhausted. All negotiations had failed. The execution date was final. For years, Bundy had survived on manipulation and delay. Now, time was something he could no longer control. Guards who interacted with him noticed a change. He was quieter, more withdrawn. The confidence that once defined him was gone. Ted Bundy, who once believed himself superior to everyone, was finally facing something he could not escape. In his final days, Bundy agreed to speak again with investigators and psychologists, but these conversations were different. There were no dramatic revelations, no sudden remorse, no emotional breakdown. Instead, Bundy remained guarded. He spoke calmly. He avoided personal responsibility. He framed his actions in detached, analytical terms. Even now, he wanted to control the narrative. But time was up. On the night before his execution, Ted Bundy received his final meal. He wrote letters. He met briefly with a minister. He spoke to his lawyers one last time. Outside the prison, crowds gathered. Some came seeking justice. Some came seeking closure. Some came simply to witness history. This alone showed the magnitude of Bundy's impact. He was no longer just a criminal. He was a symbol of how deeply evil can hide behind normality. In the early hours of January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed at Florida State Prison. There were no speeches, no confessions, no apologies. The man who had terrified America was gone. For many families, this moment brought a sense of relief. For others, it brought silence because no execution could undo what had been lost. As news spread, reactions poured in from across the country. Some celebrated. Some reflected. Some questioned the justice system. Media outlets replayed Bundy's story one last time. But this time, the charm didn't matter. The intelligence didn't matter. The fame didn't matter. Only the victims mattered. And finally, the focus began to shift away from Bundy and toward those whose lives were taken. After his execution, Bundy's remains were handled according to legal procedures. There was no grave to visit, no monument, no place to honor him, and that was intentional. Ted Bundy did not deserve remembrance. History would remember him, but not celebrate him. Ted Bundy changed America in ways few criminals ever have because of him. Police profiling improved, public awareness increased. The myth of the obvious monster was shattered. People learned a frightening truth. Evil does not always look evil. Sometimes it looks polite. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it asks for help. For decades, psychologists have studied Ted Bundy not to excuse him, but to understand him. Bundy was not insane. He knew right from wrong. He understood the consequences. What made him dangerous was a combination of extreme narcissism, lack of empathy, obsession with control, deep-seated violent fantasies. Experts classify him as a psychopathic serial killer, someone who feels no remorse but understands how to imitate normal human emotion. This made him convincing, and that made him deadly. One of the most important lessons from the Bundy case is this: evil does not always look frightening. Ted Bundy didn't hide in dark alleys. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't act suspicious. He smiled, spoke politely, seemed educated and trustworthy. Society wanted monsters to look like monsters. Bundy proved that sometimes. They look like neighbors, classmates, or co-workers. This realization changed how America viewed crime forever. Ted Bundy became famous, and that created a serious problem. The more attention he received, the more powerful he felt. The more interviews he gave, the more control he believed he had. Modern true crime has learned from this mistake. Today, responsible storytelling focuses less on the killer and more on the victims, their lives, their humanity, because they are the ones who matter. Behind every headline was a real person, a daughter, a sister, a friend. A student lives full of plans, dreams, and futures that were stolen. Their names are often forgotten, their stories left untold, but they are the true focus of this history. Ted Bundy took lives, but he does not get to define them. Why does Ted Bundy still fascinate us? The answer isn't curiosity, it's caution. His story reminds us that intelligence doesn't equal morality, that charm doesn't equal kindness, that appearances can deceive remembering. Bundy is not about glorifying him. It's about learning from the warning signs he left behind. Ted Bundy wanted to be remembered, but not like this. He wanted admiration. He wanted mystery. He wanted power. Instead, history remembers him as a lesson, a reminder that evil can be quiet, that danger can smile, and that awareness saves lives. This was the true story of Ted Bundy, not as a legend, not as a myth, but as a warning. If you're telling true crime stories, tell them responsibly, remember the victims, learn the lessons, and never forget, real monsters don't look like monsters.